Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we are diving straight into what is honestly a fascinating ecological mystery surrounding one of Australia's most iconic marsupials, the bare-nosed wombat. Now, you might think we know pretty much everything there is to know about these sturdy, burrowing creatures, but when it actually comes to tracking them across the vast Australian landscape, well, science has actually been dealing with a massive blind spot. Today, we're going to walk through some incredible new research that finally maps out their true home, using everything from highly advanced predictive models to data collected by everyday people. So, the big question we're tackling today is simply, where are the wombats? I know, it kind of sounds like the punchline to a joke, right? But this has been a surprisingly difficult scientific question to answer. Historically, our understanding of exactly where these animals live on a broad spatial scale has been incredibly limited. This explainer is essentially looking at a missing persons case, but, for wildlife. Tracking the bare-nosed wombat on a national scale is a massive logistical nightmare just because of the sheer size of the Australian continent and the crazy amount of resources you'd need for long-term monitoring. For a really long time, the scientific community literally couldn't give us a comprehensive, highly accurate answer to this seemingly simple question. Well, that has finally changed. A groundbreaking 2026 study published in the journal Ecology and Evolution by researcher Yuanting Jiang and a team of experts has effectively cracked the case. This paper, titled A National Scale Assessment of Bare-Nosed Wombat Distribution Patterns Using Multi-Source Data, is a huge deal. It represents the very first time scientists have successfully produced a national-scale predicted habitat suitability map for the bare-nosed wombat. Instead of just kind of guessing based on isolated sightings, this team decided to build a massive, data-driven map to solve this geographic mystery once and for all. Now, you might be wondering, why go through all this trouble? Why is finding them so absolutely crucial? It's because wombats are what ecologists call ecosystem engineers. Their very existence performs vital roles in maintaining the functions of their surrounding environment. Through their constant, extensive burrowing behavior, they're always turning over soil, which is huge for nutrient cycling and thermoregulation. Their activities even help maintain the water balance in the entire Australian ecosystem. Basically, if we don't know where our ecosystem engineers are actually living, we can't properly protect the very foundation of the ecosystem itself. To truly appreciate how cool this new research is, we really need to compare it to how we used to track these animals. Our past understanding was, honestly, incredibly biased. It was driven largely by human-wombat conflicts. We only knew where they were when they became a problem, like when their burrows undermined agricultural fences or, tragically, when they ended up as roadkill. It was a completely reactive way of tracking them. But this new study totally flips the script. It uses a highly sophisticated predictive tool called the MaxEnt model to create a proactive national-scale map of where they should be based purely on environmental suitability. But here's the thing. To build a national model, you need a staggering amount of information. 36,210. That is the exact number of recent wombat sightings researchers fed into their system. It's an incredibly robust data set, and having that volume of data is exactly what allowed the MaxEnt model to learn what kind of environment a bare-nosed wombat needs to survive and thrive. And what's truly fascinating is where those 36,210 data points actually came from. The researchers didn't just rely on one single method. They used a multi-source approach. Obviously, they pulled from official government databases, and they conducted their own rigorous field data collection across 12 different sites in New South Wales. But here is the most exciting part. They used the WomSAT citizen science tool. That means everyday people, folks out on hikes or just driving through the countryside, were logging their wombat sightings into an app. They actively helped scientists solve this national ecological mystery. Okay, so all of this data, the government records, the field studies, the citizen science sightings, it all gets poured directly into the MaxEnt habitat model. The model then analyzes the precise environmental characteristics of all the places wombats were spotted, and then it essentially scans the entire continent of Australia to find everywhere else that matches those exact conditions. So the grand reveal, where did the model pinpoint as the ultimate, highly suitable habitats? The model identified 3 main regions as absolute prime real estate for the bare-nosed wombat: the Sydney Basin, the southeastern corner, and the southeastern Highlands. These are the areas where the environmental conditions are basically a perfect match for what a bare-nosed wombat needs to dig its burrows and really thrive. By mapping these specific regions out on a national scale, conservationists finally have a targeted roadmap for exactly where their efforts are going to be most effective. Of course, nature is rarely perfectly contained within just 3 neat little boxes, right? And the model totally reflects that nuance. While the bulk of the highly suitable habitat is concentrated in those three core areas we just talked about, the model also predicted some scattered, more limited wombat presence in other regions. Specifically, the data points to areas down in Tasmania, as well as along the border between Victoria and South Africa. It's just a great reminder that while we can identify the most dense zones of suitability, we definitely still need to keep a close eye on these peripheral populations. But why these regions? What is it about the Sydney Basin or the southeastern Highlands that wombats love so much? Well, the study identified two key variables influencing their presence. First up is soil type. Wombats are burrowers, so soil is literally everything to them. The model showed a distinct preference for specific, highly stable soil classifications known as MB2, ME1, and MW1, which are just perfect conditions for deep burrowing. The second factor is land use. Interestingly, wombats don't just stick to the wild. They are distributed in protected areas, yes, but also heavily in agricultural grazing lands. And this overlap with human agriculture brings us right back to why those human-wombat conflicts, like the fence damage we mentioned earlier, were happening in the first place. Understanding these variables leads directly to the study's call to action. Because we know they share land with human agriculture, the researchers strongly encourage extending protected area networks, specifically within these habitats that have been deemed highly suitable by the model. But just setting up protections isn't enough. We need the implementation of effective measures to mitigate those human-wombat conflicts if we want to support long-term conservation. And, crucially, we need long-term monitoring in these newly mapped hotspots to ensure the populations actually remain stable over time. Which leaves us with a pretty profound question to ponder as we wrap up this explainer. The map has finally been drawn. We know where the wombats are, and we know they are sharing grazing land with us. So, how can we balance our human land use with the survival of these essential ecosystem engineers? The data gives us the power to protect them, for sure, but it's going to require some really thoughtful planning and compromise to ensure Australia's landscapes can support both our agricultural needs and the vital soil-turning work of the bare-nosed wombat. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive. Keep asking questions, keep exploring, and I'll see you for the next explainer.